Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to the General Eclectic Podcast with Roger. I'm your host, Kale Zeldin. Rod, here we are, number 5. What do you think?
I don't know about you, but I think you're under like 2 feet of snow right now, are you not?
Yeah. A lot of snow up here in the great state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. However, it took a turn sometime this afternoon, and it's basically turned to slush. Beautiful. Which is not fun. It literally feels like you're walking around in one of those slush puppies you used to get when you were a kid at the convenience store. But tonight, the good news is it's going to refreeze in all of its hardened glory. So tomorrow morning should be nice and perilous. I really can't wait. I really love the winter so much, Rod. I can't get enough.
And here in Baton Rouge, your hometown, I've got the back door open now to let in cool air. It was a little stuffy in the house.
Of course you do. Yeah.
But can I tell you this? I bought my family this week a present that has basically ensured that they will love me forever. I got them a home GE Opal ice making machine. It makes sonic ice, pellet ice.
Oh!
I'm not kidding.
Oh! Okay, party at Rod's. Like, I can't tell you how many times I Google that from time to time and dream a little dream. I think I'm gonna have to do it.
Well, they're not cheap. They're $500. All right, but I just gave a speech, and I'm using the money to do this thing not only for my family but for myself because I'm just a constant chewer of ice. I don't know what that's.
Yeah, I am too. You grew up that way too, huh?
I did. I think it's a sensory thing. We have sensory weirdness in my family, and one of my things is I find it so soothing to chew ice always since I was a kid. But pellet ice is the most satisfying ice to chew.
I honestly, really jealous. Just very jealous. I'm going to have to leave it at that.
I got the idea in the New Yorker this week, or last week, I guess it is. There was a piece by a writer who said that she has this obsession with pellet ice because it's the best ice. And wait a minute, you can get this made at home? She said she bought one of these machines,
it's too much.
And voila, here we are.
Yeah, I'm jealous. I'm going to really be thinking about this. I kind of need to focus on some material.
Yeah. Let's talk about serious things.
Since I am your nefarious through this episode. Yes, like I said, this is our 5th episode. We're very excited and we're itching up toward about 1,000 views per. We're hoping to up that up a little bit. So if you do like the show, please be sure to subscribe and hit the bells and whistles and all that sort of stuff. And we do have an exciting development. We hope to announce that next week's show, just some developments with the show. Okay. But I should point out right now, Rod, before we get into the meat of our show tonight, we do have an email account. So if anyone wants to reach out to us, maybe offer us some topic suggestions that they'd like to hear us talk about, maybe some guest suggestions, they can email us at thegeneraleleclecticpodcast@gmail.com. Thegeneraleleclecticpodcast@gmail.com. Look forward to hearing your feedback.
Can they send love offerings there?
Yes. And I, at this stage of the game, I'm not yet ready to accept Patreon offerings and all that nice stuff, but no doubt those fun things to come. So, all right. So I'd like to tack us on over to something that you put on tack today on the American Conservative blog. On a post you put it this morning, it was called Barstool Conservativism. And in it, you focus on 3 pieces that I'd like to sort of walk us through a little bit. The first by Matthew Walther, in which he talks about, quote, the rise of Barstool Conservatives, which then you go on to talk about a Matthew Schmitz piece, the woke and the unwoke, and Bari Weiss in the New York Post today published an article on 10 ways to fight back against woke. So those are some good pieces. So let's start off with this rise of the so-called Barstool Conservative. Rod, how much do you even know about the Barstool website?
Nothing.
Nothing.
It's one of these things I've heard about, but I'm not a sports fan, so I never bothered to check it out. But the guy, Dave Portnoy, who runs it, he's sort of on my radar as one of these people that I need to know that he exists because he does interesting things, like Joe Rogan was for a while. And so Matthew Walter, a guy who writes for the Week,
I think.
He said that he himself is a religious conservative. He's a Catholic, but he said that, look, religious and social conservatives have really lost on all the questions that count, other than possibly abortion. And he says that, in fact, most Americans don't care that much about the things that people like us care about, like same-sex marriage, porn, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and you say he's talking about kind of this general question that we all know that much ink has already been spilled virtually and will be spilled on sort of the analysis of the sort of the post-Trump world, right, and especially as it affects conservatism. And in the piece, he says this, and you quote this in your blog. It says, "What Trump recognized that there are millions of Americans who do not oppose or even care about abortion or same-sex marriage, much less stem cell research or any of the other causes that had animated traditional social conservatives. Instead, Trump correctly intuited that the new culture war would be fought over very different and more nebulous issues, vague concerns about political correctness and SJWs, opposition to the popularization of the so-called critical race theory, sentimentality about the American flag and the military, the rights of male undergraduates to engage in fornication while intoxicated without fear of the Title IX mafia.
LSU, baby.
Whatever their opinion, it's right. Whatever their opinions might have been 20 years ago, in 2021, these are people who, with varying degrees of enthusiasm, accept pornography, homosexuality, drug use, legalized gambling, and whatever Gamergate was about. On economic questions, their views are a curious and at times incoherent mix of standard libertarian talking points and pseudo-populism, embracing lower taxes on the one hand and stimulus checks and stricter regulation of social media platforms on the other." Walther says, "I've come to think of the people who answer to the above description as Barstool Conservatives, in reference to the popular sports website, especially its founder and CEO, Dave Portnoy." Thank you for throwing your drink in the back there, Rob.
The dog had his head out the window and was barking at something on the street. I'm sorry, Kale. Carry on.
That's quite all right. We're so professional here at the General Eclectic. That's all right. That's all right. So Portnoy, as this sort of this kind of totem figure for this sort of post-religious right, post-conservative movement, Barstool Conservative. And what are we to make of this?
Well, I mean, I think that as so many pundits said when a shocking number of evangelicals went for Donald Trump, that really showed that even religious conservatives, formerly religious conservatives, cared a lot less about things religious conservatives were supposed to care about when they found an advocate in Trump. I think it shows that it is possible to make these alliances, I mean, just as a matter of practicality, between the sort of people who are straight edge, more or less, on religious conservative issues, and these barstool conservatives, from the point of view of the religious and social conservatives, they stand for leaving us alone. I mean, Trump, to his credit, was very good about pro-life issues, and I hope that that's a big issue for me, and I know it is for you. So that's one that I don't want to negotiate on. Nevertheless, I do see in this sort of collaboration, this natural collaboration that seems to have come up between people like you and me on one side and people like the Brett Weinstein, Heather Heying, Bari Weiss, some of the people who don't share a lot of our views about God or about sexuality or certain issues, but they feel very strongly about wokeness because they understand that is a direct threat to their freedom of speech, to their freedom of thought, and that's something that naturally concerns people like you and me.
Yeah, I think a lot about this. I sort of have roughly in my head been kind of calling it, Tribe Called Truth or something like this, because I was struck early on in I got two things I want to go to, the Live Not by Lies aftermath, and then some IDW stuff, which we can talk about in the end, but it's connected. And I was really struck. You did a sit down in the wake of Live Not by Lies with Bari Weiss and Natan Sharansky.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
You did a whole thing, and on the merits of it, I mean, Bari Weiss is not what we would call, a sort of a social conservative or a religious conservative. She's religious, and we could talk a little bit about that. But again, in sort of the old-fashioned way that we would see these things, she's engaged to be married to a woman, and considers herself kind of center-left on some social issues and center-right on some kind of political or policy issues. But she's not, somebody would think, oh yeah, she and Rod need to get together. They can really, really do a fantastic piece. But what do you think brings you and a Bari together?
Well, yeah, it's the having a common enemy, in wokeness. Bari, as you'll recall, quit her job at the New York Times. She's young. She had a great job at the top of the American journalistic pile, but she quit in principle, over principle, that she could not stand the way the Times management was letting the young woke mob in the newsroom run the organization. And that kind of courage is rare. I learned, Kale, when I was reporting out Live Not by Lies, I learned from a number of people I interviewed, dissidents I interviewed, that you have to make allies and take allies where you can. This guy I talked to, František Mikloško in Slovakia, he himself is a very conservative Catholic, but he said that he had to make friends with the liberals, secular liberals, liberals in the sense that everybody in the West is a liberal Democrats, because there were so few people who had the guts to stand up to the communist. And anybody who had the guts to do that was going to be your friend no matter what. Similarly in Prague, Kamila Bendova, the widow of Václav Benda, the Bendas were the only Catholics, the only Christians of any sort inside Václav Havel's inner circle. Most of those people were hippies, some various forms of liberal.
Secular humanists,
right? Yeah. And there was even one guy who was a Trotskyist, but he hated the communist government. Wow. So Camilla told me, she goes, Rod, when you're in fights like this, when everybody is so intimidated, if you see somebody who has the guts to stand up for the truth, you need to be on that person's side, because they need your help and you need their help. You can sort out the rest of these issues when the battle is over.
And I think this is a point worth dwelling on, because it's a frustration that I have with the various sort of purity police and the various Christian tribes and certainly social conservative tribes, that there's you can't let's say Bari Weiss, not because of anything, let's say, she says in a great piece like today in the New York Post, 10 ways to fight back against woke, but because she's a lesbian and is engaged to be married to another woman. And it's like, and obviously from a sort of a social conservative standpoint, I have a basic disagreement with it, but what strikes me is that Bari is saying some really vitally important things that are not just good for her and not just good for her milieu, but for all of us, especially for those of us who believe in the deep necessity for dialogue, genuine dialogue, not dialogue the way that we get beat over the head with it, but dialogos, right? To actually have these conversations and to have truth as the thing which we're actually trying to work for and work toward. And Bari, I think, is such a powerful ally in that. I mean, she's really dogged it. I mean, not enough people, I think, respect, at least in terms of people I've talked to, what she did. I mean, before she's I don't think she's 30. She might be 30, but she's a young woman, a young professional, and she was right at the top. I mean, she had a position at the New York Times, and you and I'd make our jokes about the New York Times, and but we respect what the New York Times is and the power that it has, and for her to go there, get that job, do some important work, and to say, you know what, not even worth it. Right. You guys are nuts. Huge. You're crazy. You're poison. I mean, that's just an astounding marker of deep character.
Yeah, it really is. And not just for practical reasons should we make alliances with folks like her, but František Mikloško, the Slovakian Catholic, told me that he's felt over the course of his life that he needs to be in genuine dialogue with liberals and secularists because he doesn't want to get caught up in his own bubble. He said, I need to keep my mind open and to be challenged by things. Not that I'll give up my principles necessarily, but so I'll always be thinking about the society that I'm in. But František, when you meet him, he's got such kind eyes. He genuinely loves people. He doesn't see people as just bearers of ideology, but he sees them as human beings.
Right. Well, and look, that seems to be an ever increasing, that seems to be coming at a real premium now. I mean, it's very hard in this, we've talked earlier about the sort of the harrowing out of the center, right? And that there doesn't seem to be kind of reasonable spaces that you can exist in the middle, that you have to sort of pick these sides and have those kind of allies, so to speak, I think is hugely important, especially as we try to sort of figure out what's right and what's true. And too often in our tribes, it's edge patrolling, right? It's patrolling, how much are you really committed to the tribe? How pure are you really? And that kind of stuff, it reminds me of the way that, the sort of the sneering about the scholastics, that you're busy worrying about how many angels can dance on the pin of the head of a needle, as opposed to something much more lived, something much more real. It smacks of that to me, and I think that's the kind of thing that happens. That kind of infighting happens when the larger sort of goals you despair over. And so I kind of want to talk to you a little bit about, you mentioned that you were surprised, as many of us were, that the evangelicals broke for Trump back in the day. And, do you see that breaking toward Trump as an admittance of defeat already, or do you see that, or was it calculating from the get-go?
Oh, no, I don't know that it was calculated. I think, to be honest, what it probably was more than anything else was the desire to be with a winner, and to preserve that access to power. And I'm not saying, from a theological point of view, that doesn't look very good. But if you believe that the only way or the primary way to have access within a polity is to have access to political power, then you're going to do something like that. I think they made a big mistake, and I've said this for a while, that Christians, especially evangelicals, but all Christians, to the extent that we think that if we just get our people in place in the corridors of power, political power and judicial power, that'll solve things. I mean, that was wrong.
Well, and I think it's wrong for the same reasons that we brought up last podcast, where we were talking about Aaron Renn's formulation of the three worlds Christianity. The sort of the positive world Christianity, the neutral world Christianity, and the negative world Christianity. And Renn, and I think both of you and I agree with Aaron Renn's formulation here, we very much live in negative world Christianity, and yet still so many people refuse to...
I've lost you.
Again, I'm talking about, conservative Christians, or just Christians, refuse to acknowledge that simple and perhaps too painful truth. And this is what I'm struck with in the Schmitz piece. He talks about that there, that simple left-right maps don't really work so much anymore. Then there seems to be emergence of what he calls, the nuns, the trads, and the woke. And again, the woke, we know what the sort of the critical social justice folks, the trads, and he's talking about trads as not as like the sort of like a rad trad Catholic or a trad-ish Catholic like me, but trads and those people who sort of adhere to traditional forms of religious expression in all of their varieties. And then, of course, the nuns, and the nuns are this huge
N-O-N-E-S
cohort. N-O-N-E-S, yeah, sorry, not the black-habited kind, but the nuns, the N-O-N-E-S, are this huge chunk of people, and they kind of divide halfway through. And so he's arguing for a sort of a new alliance. And again, I think this gets back to what you were talking about with the Portnoy, the Barstool Conservatism.
Well, yeah, it's just this is politics, right? It's like, and especially if you are a trad in the Matthew Schmitz sense, some sort of social or religious conservative, that you are on the losing side of the wave, the cultural wave, and it's probably not going to turn our way anytime soon. So What do you do if you're weak? You can't afford to play purity games. At this point, and look, I've been called a defeatist about this stuff, but I think I'm just being a realist. That, at this point, I feel like the best that our side can hope for is to build strong defenses again, around our institutions and our practices like homeschooling and our churches. And then if we hold those, then we should always go out and try to evangelize people. It's true, but we just need to realize the time we're in. And so many Christians just don't. And
well, I want to. On that note, I want to read just a brief couple of sentences from that Matthew Schmitz piece. And again, all these pieces we're talking about, people we'll put in the description below here. But despite their differences, an alliance could form between trads, small t trads, and the true nuns who reject religion, but may well see it as less of a threat than the growth of woke government power. Trads have an all-encompassing beliefs that offend liberal and secular sensibilities, but they affirm the reality of biological differences between the sexes. They believe that your deeds and beliefs are more important than your race. Even when they reject the political formulations of liberalism, most still believe in the virtue of liberality and tolerance. Because they believe in the fallenness of man, they uphold the possibility of forgiveness. Like the nuns, most trads are not utopians. Unlike the woke, they can tolerate those with fundamentally different beliefs. Trads and nuns will never agree, but they can ally. And I really like the way he formulates it. That really helped me today, just as I try to make sense of everything.
If you hear a lot of people on the left, especially the woke talk, they think that people like you and me, conservative Christians, want to go out there and shut down gay businesses and stuff that we don't even. It's just ridiculous, right? We don't have any desire for that. But they elevate the idea that we might defend a Masterpiece Cake Shop, right, for his religious liberty, his right not to make a wedding cake. Nobody's defending the idea that he should not serve gay customers. Even he doesn't believe that. He just didn't want to make a wedding cake. Right. But the woke want everybody to believe that we're all about not serving gay customers, like we're some Woolworths lunch counter in 1950 Selma, and that's just not true. I think that the
gold standard, right? I mean that's the way that all of woke movements achieve their traction or attempt to achieve their traction is by grafting it on to the original civil rights movement of the 50s and the 60s.
Well, and Christopher Caldwell had a really good book last year that came out. That it's a deeply unsettling book that makes that same case. He argues that that because everything gets worked into the civil rights paradigm, that that becomes it becomes something that. Sorry, the dog.
Oh, it's okay. Let Roscoe be
there's
Roscoe.
Nobody else here at the house now, so I'm sorry, everybody, for the dog barking. But no, Christopher Caldwell says that that becomes the juggernaut. That as soon as you can pair anything onto the civil rights narrative, you've won in this culture. I remember
because nobody wants to be associated with those people who are torturing and tormenting and terrorizing the black population of America in the 50s. Like who wants to associate themselves with that? Nobody does.
Exactly. And I think people like Bari Weiss and Brett Weinstein, who they're hiring, look, they have enough sense to know that people like you and me aren't going to try to put gays back in the closet. You hear some of them talk, some of the woke talking about how that we're going to come after Obergefell. Look, as I try to tell the few conservatives I know who somehow think that might happen one day, I'm like, you don't understand how this thing works. That all Obergefell did was remove from the states the power to set marriage policy vis-a-vis homosexuality. And if Obergefell got turned over, which is not going to happen, but let's just assume it did, gay marriage is already thoroughly mainstream. It'll take about a week for gay marriage to be the law of the land in every state in this country. And for better or for worse, that's how it is. And the big battles, they've won. The left has won. And now I think that, and I hate this as a conservative, not a libertarian, I hate that in order to defend things that I believe in as a religious conservative, I have to do it under essentially libertarian guise. But that's just life in America. the 21st century.
So that you mentioned something just before we went on air here, about I think it's a Ryan T. Anderson piece that sort of talks about sort of going down the religious liberty route, but there is another way to sort of negotiate and talk about this in the public public square.
Ryan Anderson, who's the new head of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, he argues that it's important to defend religious liberty rights, no doubt about it, when it comes to cases like coercion regarding transgenders and things like that within institutions. But he said that we on the right can't get stuck on simply defending it on matters of religious liberty. He said, for example, on the trans case, that science is on our side here, and a lot of people recognize the inherent unfairness of a government edict compelling women's athletics to take in biological males who identify as females and let them compete on, or compel them to compete on the same platform as biological women. I mean, it's crazy. I don't know if you saw this on Twitter this week. There was something going around showing a male to female transsexual, transgender, whatever, running and doing some sort of track thing, hurdles. Yes. And the transgender female was so much bigger than these women, and she just left them in the dust. And the explanatory text with this image said that this runner, when, quote unquote, she was a male, they were like number 330th in the world. But as a female, they're like number one. I mean, look, you don't have to reject all transgenderism in order to see that is unfair, and you don't have to bring God into it at all. That's just a question of basic justice. And Ryan Anderson is saying that we should not fall back on religious liberty as a reflex, that we can argue these cases in the public square in secular ways that appeal to the nuns.
Yeah, again, the NONES, as Rod is talking about it here. I mean, and that just seems, I think that, in a lot of these issues, I sort of think of it, if I were going to have a dinner party, who would I be sort of, fine with going to a dinner party, and having, this sort of variety of people around the table and having drinks before dinner and enjoying a nice dinner and after dinner and all that. And, you think of somebody like a Bari Weiss, you think of, these sort of heterodox people, like they're good people, and the spirit of liberality, should reign. And therefore, like what Ryan Anderson is talking about is like, we don't have to limit ourselves, I think, to merely religious arguments. Oh, well, you can only be against this because, you're a Catholic or you're an Orthodox or you're a Christian. It's oddly delimiting. But anyway, what then do we do with the woke? I mean, I think that the thing that we keep running up against, and maybe that's just these 5 weeks that we've been doing this together, that it's so much in the news. But I mean, how can we, quote unquote, fight back against wokeness?
Oh, man, it's such a difficult question because so much of it is happening in the private sphere where law doesn't really touch. I mean, for example, if a company chooses to adopt some sort of racial training, anti-racist training, as so many of them are doing, even if it's really crazy, they have a lot of leeway within that company to do exactly that. And if you don't want to work for the company, fine, don't work for the company. But I saw just the other day that CocaCola has decided now that it will only that when the companies and the law firms that it sends out its legal work to do, it will demand that a certain number of lawyers of color work on their work, or Coke won't pay the law firms full price. I mean, that's outrageous, But
that's incredible.
Coke is a huge corporate client, and there will be law firms willing to bend to that. One thing I think is so interesting about that, though, Kale, is, I was talking to a friend of mine today. He sent me an email he had got from a friend of his who works for a failing institution. Let me just put it that way. I don't want to out this person. Guy works for a failing institution, and as a sort of a last gasp to try to save the institution, the leadership has gone super, super woke and are trying to sell the product, and I'm trying to be euphemistic here, wants to sell a product to a woke audience that doesn't care about it. But, I mean, they're just beclowning themselves. My friend's correspondent says that this will never work. He goes, I'm so distressed. I've given over 20 years to this institution, and now it's just falling apart. And I got into a conversation with my friend about this, the guy who shared that with me. I said, this is one thing that a lot of people just don't understand about how institutions work. That a lot of people have this very simplistic economic idea of incentives. They think that companies will always go where the money is, but this is just not true. This guy who wrote in is indicating that this is clearly not where the money is. In my line of work, for 20 years, I was working in newsrooms, and I could see that newspapers were run by ideologues. I'm talking about in the bean counters, ideologues who it depended more. It was more important to them to have the esteem of people in their social class and to be thought of as progressive and right-minded than it was to make money. And I saw this myself in my own terms.
Yeah. Well, in my experience too, I don't know if the audience knows this, but I lived and worked in Hollywood for half a decade. And I remember going in thinking that was basically the truth, right? That Hollywood executives were sort of the ultimate capitalists, and that they really cared about making money, and that is true to a point, right? But in my experiences, when you achieve a certain amount of monetary success, you then sort of tack over to clout. And I think that maybe the thing that brings these anyway. So what you would do, especially during, you would look toward late year releases so that you could prep yourself for a run at the Oscars. And this because in one of your earlier instantiations you were a movie critic, so the drill. But but the prestige film, right, is something is also a driver. It's not mere capitalism. I mean, they'll do what is it, Goldman's riff that every sequel is I forget what he says. You write the first movie, and then anyone you write after that, the sequels are just chasing after the money. And he has of course a funnier way to say it than I'm remembering. But at any rate, I think the thing that unites money and prestige is this status, right?
Status.
I think that status is the real driver here, and if it's not money, then it's some kind of prestige. I mean, because what else can you do after you have all the money in the world in the bank, and you've got a nice house in Malibu, and you've got a yacht, and you've got all the stuff, right? What do you do then? Well, then you find another way to distinguish yourself and to achieve
right. So
status.
Here's Coke.
I think that's the
right.
thing.
Well, here's CocaCola, right, in Atlanta. Coke executives live in that city, which is a heavily African American city, and now they've really gone out on a limb to push diversity in a way that may actually be against their interests narrowly conceived, in the sense that if you have legal work to be done, you want the best legal work possible, and you don't really care who does it. If all the lawyers are Jewish, so what? You want the best.
Yeah.
But Coke is demanding a quota on its legal.
So is this a sort of a Havel's Green Grocer situation in some interesting kind of way?
Mean?
Well, if you're Coca-Cola and you live and work and you're doing well for yourself, you are Coca-Cola after all, the ultimate legacy corporate behemoth, right? You want to make sure the good times keep rolling, and so you hang the sign. You hang the sign in front of your place of business. That demonstrates to the world that you're signaling your virtue with the prevailing sort of moral ethos.
I actually, you may be right about that, but I also think that the Coca-Cola executives probably really do believe this, because the whole wokeness is primarily something of the middle and the upper middle classes.
So is it also a Southern thing?
Oh, I don't think so. Do you? Why would you think?
Okay, no. Well, Coca-Cola's
yeah, but I
Atlanta.
mean, why?
Atlanta's a
But
very, urbane and cosmopolitan city in a sort of a, I mean, that's what's so interesting about, the South, right? Is you have these sort of urban centers, and Atlanta's a perfect example. Surrounded, it's a blue city in a blue metroplex city surrounded by kind of a red state.
Here's the interesting thing: these woke job programs or job initiatives. Mm-hmm. They never seem to affect the lower class people of color. I think you were the one. Maybe you said it on last week's podcast that if there's never going to be any sort of push to look for parity, for proportional parity among garbage collectors. Nobody's going to want to hold out for us to hire more garbage collectors of color. It's always for management jobs and prestige jobs like lawyers, doctors, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which means that the whole thing's is based on some level on a farce, right? It's not being consistent with its own dictates.
Yeah, but here's the thing, and I can see that we're running out of time, so we'll wrap it up. But at what point does the things have to fail in order for people within wokeness to give up on the ideology, or do they end up just doubling down on it? No, it's not an answer, but I'm just saying that this is the whole Soviet Union question, right? That's.
Well, I certainly you could argue that it will. I mean, look, the Soviet Union went on for a really long time. I mean, 1917 to 1989, is that roughly?
1991,
fuzzy on the latter date.
91. Well, I mean, there's a lot of ruin in a nation.
Yeah, I mean, generations of ruin. So I'm not so quick to dismiss the threat as well. This is. I mean, look, people played this game all the time. Well, I'm sure they said to you, Rod, why do you keep writing about this college craziness? Once the kids get out into the real world and they have to have a paycheck and they have to, work in the real world, all of this sort of woke stuff will go away. And that has not proven to be true, right? We know that those things that were these when they were kids, they were steeped in at the seminaries of the new Church of Woke, which is what elite and most regular colleges are now, right? And I as an educator myself, I am continually amazed that people refuse to acknowledge that is what is true about college. I mean, when are sort of normal, red, white, blue, yellow, black, Americans going to recognize that when they send their kids away to college, they're not getting educated, they're getting indoctrinated. Like it's shocking to me that people will have chosen to be naive about this, right? But when it's going to then migrate into the HR departments, which is what we're seeing. I mean, this is what Bari Weiss, left the New York Times about. That the workplace has become invaded with this ideology, and it's not an ideology that brooks dissent. This is not like, oh, well, Rod likes LSU and I like Alabama football. Like, this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about, a sort of a Mercusian, repressive tolerance, right? They're not going to just sort of agree to disagree. I'm talking about your hardcore woke folk. And, the question is, will they sooner or later alienate this sort of group of nuns in the middle, NONES in the middle? Will they alienate people where the nuns are like, well, I'm not, I don't want to have anything to do with that kind of, that neo-racist religion. I'm going to go hang out with Kale and Rod and the rest of these trads who at least, want to grill and have a decent Saturday afternoon.
I hope so. I mean,
I don't think it's going to. I don't think it's going to burn itself out quickly, I guess is what I'm saying, and I think it's something that we are going to have to mobilize, and fight really, like actually, and not just let it burn itself out. I don't think it's going to burn itself out.
And since we last talked, I gave a speech at St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary. Yes. And it was the Schmemann Lecture, which is a really big deal at the seminary in honor of Father Alexander Schmemann, one of the former rectors. And they tried to cancel me. The Orthodox left, the members of the Orthodox left, usually academic types, tried to say I was a white supremacist, I was this, I was a bigot, I was that, I shouldn't be. And fortunately, the seminary held firm. I've got a lot of raves about my talk, and so that was that. One thing I said in the talk, though, and this is why I even bring it up to speak to your point about where do we draw the line, how do we fight them. I said in the talk that I do not believe that Christians, and I was speaking to seminarians, mind you. I said I do not believe that Christians should dialogue with people within the church, within church circles, who want to contest basic doctrinal and dogmatic beliefs, so particularly LGBT. Because I told the students, I said, ask people who have come into Orthodoxy from mainline Protestant churches or even from Catholic churches, and how the dialogue works. It's entirely a strategy by the woke to wear down the traditionalists, and after the woke gain power, the dialogue ends then, because they will say, we can't dialogue about people's basic identity, and they will take the stand that we should have taken in the first place. So I think that would be...
And they'll use the language of therapy and violence, right? That you are wishing violence against them, and you're trying to cancel their existence as a person, and you're not even a good Christian. I mean, again, it's the more Christian than the Christian sort of.
Yeah, but this is a narrow bounded issue of like within church institutions and church circles. That is one way where I would say you cannot give the woke any ground at all. Just do not engage them. And I've been invited by some of these woke Orthodox people to participate in certain in dialogue on their websites or on podcasts, and I just don't do it. Not because I think they're necessarily bad people, but because I think the whole idea of dialogue in the sense they mean is a bad faith exercise.
Yeah, it's a setup, right? And this is the truth, right? I mean, you and I, not that I would get invited, but you and I would much prefer to go and sit in Joe Rogan's podcast booth, newly minted in Austin, Texas, and have a great 3-hour conversation with him. He's not a Christian, he's not a conservative, but he's just a guy who likes to have genuine conversations. And he's not going to sort of do the gotcha game. He's going to ask you real questions. And I think this is what is so missing in the tribal wars, is that you can go and get a fair shake from a Joe Rogan, who does, he's an MMA guy and a stand-up comedian, and he's crass and crude and all of that, and no fan of organized religion. I mean, his favorite thing to say about the Catholic Church, for instance, is they're all a bunch of MFers, and child effers, right? But you could go on in that show and you would have a great and productive conversation, because he actually wants to know what you think and is concerned about coming to the truth. Whereas within our own tribes, we're walking into a sort of a lion's den.
Yeah, it's so weird listening to Joe Rogan. This is a guy who seems to be more interested in what his guests have to say than somebody like Terry Gross, the veteran interviewer on NPR on Fresh Air. Because she just is so fixated. She's such a liberal nanny goat, But Rogan, I probably have as much in common in terms of what I believe with Terry Gross as I do with Joe Rogan, but Rogan actually wants to talk. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I don't know. One of my Twitter follows is Katie Herzog, and she and Jesse Signal, I think, have a podcast called Blocked and Reported, and she's good at the Twitter game, and she's funny. And she said, I think it was on Sunday morning or so, she said, well, 8 out of the 9 segments in this hour were all about diversity, equity, inclusion. The 9th one was on the weather, and maybe that one can be worked into the DEI discussion next hour too. I mean, it really, it's comical. It's comical. It's one vein. They're going to hit that. They're going to hit that until I don't know what. I'm not sure what's due. Is it a submission tactic?
Well, yeah, it's like a lot of evangelicals will want to relate Jesus very explicitly to everything they do, every discussion they do. And they feel that I've heard evangelical friends of mine who work in the arts or in arts adjacent fields will talk about how frustrated they can be with their own community because so many people in their own churches expect things to be explicitly about Jesus. There has to be an altar call at the end of everything. Yeah. And this is, if you understand diversity, equity, and inclusion and wokeness as a religion, a lot of things make a lot more sense.
Yeah, there's a great Flannery O'Connor. She's so funny, but there's a great Flannery O'Connor quip, something along the lines of, and I'm going to garble the quote, so apologies in advance, but she says, "It's not a work of art if at the end of it they ask you to write a check." And it's so true, and of course she's speaking to Catholics and Christian artists. Like, if you require an altar call at the end of your segment, then it's not a work of art.
I am so glad you brought up Flannery O'Connor here as we come to the end, because she called herself a Hillbilly Thomist. A Thomist meaning someone who follows the thoughts of St. Thomas Aquinas. Well, in the past week, I have heard and just fell in love with the second album by a group called the Hillbilly Thomists. They are a bunch of Dominican priests, and St. Thomas Aquinas was a Dominican. They're a bunch of Dominican priests who play bluegrass and sing gospel songs, bluegrass gospel songs. They are fantastic. Their new album is out. And I did an interview with them on my blog about being Catholics who sing this quintessentially low church Protestant style and how it works. And they're just great. And I highly recommend the Hillbilly Thomist. You can find them.
How did you stumble upon them?
Well, I remember when they first came out, like in 2017. That was their first album. I may have found them online, and I thought, oh, this is going to be a novelty act. They're not going to be very good, but it's like, haha, look at the Catholic guys in the Catholic religious order playing bluegrass. It turns out they're great. And they came together at the Dominican House of Studies in Washington, D.C., and now they have this new album out, and it is so moving. I was playing it around the house, and my wife and kids were like, wait, what is that? That's great. I said, these guys are Catholic. They're not Pentecostals or Baptist. They're Catholic.
That's
but
right.
They're very generous and small C Catholic. And I asked them a question in the interview about, isn't it strange to be Catholics and Catholic priests who are playing and singing this Protestant music? How does that work? And they said, well, Gregorian chants are great in the liturgy, but, when you stand around the campfire, you need something a little different. And bluegrass is that thing you need.
Yeah. That's great. That's good. Well, I'm going to keep this in the music vein. So as I've outed myself already, I'm a big music fan, and I've become a big YouTube fan. And anyway, in one of my searches, it brought me to a relatively famous YouTuber. I didn't know about him until about a year ago, but his name is Rick Beato, and he himself is a teacher and a musician, and he has this series of YouTube videos, and it's called What Makes This Song Great? And he, of course, is deeply knowledgeable about music and all of it, and he walks you through. So today I rewatched the episode on Led Zeppelin's Ramble On from Led Zeppelin 2, and he breaks the whole song down, and he isolates the bass track and the drum track and the acoustic opening and then the guitar overlay, and what it really brings, and he loves it. You can see that the teacher loves his work, and he's teaching you on YouTube. It's just really an inspiration to me as a teacher myself, but it really reminds you that it was a genuine moment. Popular music, from the mid '60s, through the '70s, was a genuine eruption of musical genius, and I will stand up for that at any time. And he really gives you the kind of the source code, the DNA of why these songs are so good, and like why Jimmy Page is a master songwriter and a master producer. It's so wonderful. I cannot recommend his channel and more. It's just fantastic, and makes me want to go out and do another deep dive into all of the Led Zeppelin discography.
Look, I've also I'll make this very quick, but I've gotten into Ted Lasso on Apple Plus. It came out last August, and a friend of mine said, "You need to watch this," but I said, "No, it's about sports." And of course, I was wrong. In the same way, I was wrong about Friday Night Lights. Friday Night Lights was not really about sports; it was about small towns and life in small towns. But Ted Lasso is a comedy starring Jason Sudeikis as this super naive Ned Flanders-like Midwestern football coach who is hired by a British Premier League soccer team to come over and coach soccer, though he doesn't know a thing about soccer. And the joke is that the soccer team owner is a woman who has just gotten the soccer team in a divorce from her philandering billionaire husband, and the soccer team is the thing he loves most of all, so she's going to try to ruin the team to hurt him. So she brings over this naive Gomer Pyle-like American to coach the team and run it into the ground. Well, he gets there, and the Brits are just so nasty to him, just unbelievably nasty. But he just keeps smiling, and he's just a good old Midwestern guy. And it turns out that he kind of keeps winning them over. And it's a very sweet show, but it's sweet without being smarmy. It is. It's not for the whole family. There's some racy parts in it, but it is. It's such a feel-good show. It's a feel-good show that really makes you feel good. You don't feel manipulated, and I can't recommend it enough. Ted, Lasso, Lasso on Apple Plus.
I do have to have one more plug before I go. I read something literally just before we came on air today, and it's a story. It's sad, but it's really beautiful. It's on onepeter5.com, and it's a story by a writer named Dan Millett. And the title of it is on Doing the Little Things First, A Teacher's Story. And it's about a teacher and a young kid and a pair of orange shoelaces. Really beautiful, really moving, really impressive.
Peter 5. I'm going to go there.
One Peter 5. It's really a beautiful
ONE
piece.
Peter
really
5. That's a Catholic site, a trad site. They often have really good stuff there that even a non-Catholic like me likes to read.
Yeah, so... All right, well, that's a wrap for episode number 5. Rod, send us off here.
Thanks, everybody, for listening.
We have to do
don't, as Uncle Bubba says, don't get nothing on you.
That's right. All right, take care. Bye-bye.